Welcome to this phonetics and pronunciation course for Clil teachers, for teachers who teach other subjects in English. What you're about to watch is a live recording of a session that took place at Clil in Zaragoza. So you will be able to hear every now and then actual participants in the background taking part in answering questions, etc. The main objective, of course, is to try and make sense of how phonetics works, how the phonetic symbols and the sound system works in English, to ultimately try and improve our own pronunciation in English for our lessons. This first session is a brief introduction to the history of English, to try and understand why English spelling and pronunciation are so different. Then we will have a look at different social and geographical varieties of English. And finally, we will discuss some key concepts in phonetics that are going to be very useful all along the course. So this is the first part of an 8-part course. I wanted to start with this. Some people were saying, oh, this is a tongue twister. Something like that, yeah? How would you read it? That's exactly that. You can read it, it doesn't matter, one way or the other. Lead, as in the leader of a country, for example, or the leader of a group. Lead rhymes with read, the present symbol of a verb to read. But led, what's led? It's a material, it's an element. Okay, it's plomo. Led also rhymes with read in the past. Okay, so yeah, we have exactly the same spelling in both words in two completely different pronunciations. And this is what we're going to find lots of times in this course, just for you to get used to it. There is also this very famous poem, well, at least for teachers of English anyway. This was written years and years ago at the beginning of in the early 20th century. It was published in a newspaper in the Times, I think. And if you started reading it, while you were waiting, some of you were reading it, and you can see there are lots of words that you have exactly the same spelling, or the same, the same chains of letters, and you have completely different pronunciations in different words. Okay, we're not going to read it now, but if you want, you will have all these, you will have the presentations and everything, I'll discuss it in a minute. You have the link there to listen to it. So you can decide if you were right or wrong, if you got the pronunciations right or wrong, okay? It's a very funny poem anyway. Just to start our session, can anybody read the two parts for me, please? Okay, Vanessa and Cristina. Can you?
Dude, I said let's go biking this weekend. Oops.
Okay, and we have this Viking. So we only have a difference between this and the Viking, between biking and Viking, yeah? But in English, in this case, it makes a whole world of a difference. So sometimes just this small sound is going to make, obviously, a very big difference. Anyway, just a stupid joke. This is very basically what we had. This is very basically what you had in the leaflet that you read when you registered for the course. The first session we're going to have today is the most boring session, I have to tell you. So please bear with me. If you put up with this session, then you can do everything. Okay? I'm not going to give you any handouts. There's going to be lots of talk, but lots of videos as well. So don't worry. Okay, we're going to have an introduction to try and understand why English is so tricky about pronunciation, the historical reasons and the social reasons why that happens. Okay, then we will spend some time talking about vowels, because vowels in English are very different from Spanish. We'll talk about vowels and something very important, something called weak forms. And probably you don't know anything about it. It's going to change the way you see English and English pronunciation. Okay? We will discuss something about how to pronounce the letter S, how to pronounce these two letters in different contexts. Hello. I don't think you're here, Alfredo, no. No? Yeah. How to pronounce these two letters, whether it's a past or in other contexts. We will have a look at some tricky consonant sounds that, may give problems to Spanish speakers especially, and about something called coalescence. Don't worry, we will discuss it later. And then the last session will be about, we will concentrate on individual words, but no, we speak connecting words. And in English, that's very important, how to connect different words in speech, how we say actual full sentences, and intonation, which is probably the most difficult thing in every language, and the last thing we ever learn to probably do correctly, if ever. I'm not sure I have English intonation correct. Okay? How do you feel about it? I have given you lots of things, but if by the end of next week you have learned these 3 things, I'll be happy. This is all you ever need to remember, okay? And probably after, years after this course is over, if you remember these 3 things, I'll be a happy woman. I can die a happy woman. Number 1, English is what we call a stressed time language, and we will discuss that later, okay? So remember that. English, stress, not syllables, stress. That's the difference with Spanish. There is a sound that needs to be your friend from today, and it's this sound that we call the schwa. It's a sound. Not very attractive, not very interesting, but it's the core of English. So schwa needs to be your friend. I will say this sentence, like 20 times every session, okay? And finally, if you're able to give aspiration to these sounds whenever needed, again, you're going to make a change from being a Spanish person who speaks very good English to someone who speaks very good English. And maybe people won't be able to tell whether you're Spanish or from wherever. So these 3 things: stress, schwa, and aspirations. And if you remember that, that's it. Okay? Okay, so in this session we're going to talk about some practical arrangements about the course, Google Classroom, etc. How to park, where to park, toilets, etc. I will give you some essential materials that maybe you need for your own use or for your classes to download or to get, so free things, of course. We will discuss the different standards of English. Because, in Spanish we have Real Academia de la Lengua or something like that. In English, there's not that. So there are different good models, good standards of English. And what do we mean when we talk about good English pronunciation? Okay? We will discuss why English and pronunciation are so different. They are worlds apart in English. So we will try and find some reasons why that happens. We will introduce some key concepts in phonetics, like vowels, diphthongs, linears, forties, vowels, etc. And we will try to test how good is your phonemic intuition, just from the start, to see if you have good guesses or not so good guesses about pronunciation, okay? Just for you to know, all the materials are going to be in a Google Classroom that I opened for you. I think most people are already in it. We'll discuss in a minute. But anyway, just for you to know, if you're into social media, the Car Lady Center has a Twitter account, a Facebook account, Instagram, if you want to follow us and know about all our courses. This is my blog where I've been, uploading things for some 6 years now. So maybe there's a lot of nonsensical stuff, but maybe something, might be okay. And then this is the blog at the Carlay, if you want to follow us or see. What we do is we upload, calls for new courses, and also we sometimes write about things we're doing. We sometimes share photos of our courses, tips. Anyway, just whatever. So if you want to go there, it's there for you. So finally, about Google Classroom, I send you an invitation to join the classroom. I think most of you are already. what I'm going to do, I will upload the presentations for all the sessions. I told some of you I'm doing an experiment today. I'm recording what I'm saying. Don't worry, not you, just my voice. So I'm recording it, so I will upload the presentation, normal standard presentation, and I will upload the video as well, if you ever want to hear my voice as well. I will upload links, etc. So you can always come back to it. I won't close it, so you can use the materials now or in 3 months' time or whatever. Okay? Did you have any problems getting in? No, I think it was more or less okay. So anyway, resources if you're interested in phonetics or if you want to know a bit more about sounds and the sounds of English. Okay? Okay, there is something which is very good and it's free as well, that comes from the British Council. There is this phonemic chart. If you have Apple devices, you can download it as an app. It's a free app. If you use PC or Android, you can go to this link and you can download it as a software. Anyway, just let me... Okay, as I always say, those of you who know me already know that I always say the BBC has the answer to everything. So you're always going to find something in the BBC that's going to be helpful, okay? So if you go to this link, you have just the PDF file with a phonemic chart, and they tell you whether they are short vowels, long vowels, or diphthongs. And then they divide consonants in voiceless, voiced, and we will translate what that means. But anyway, if you want to have the chart, you have it there as well. You may know this chart from, if you've studied at Geographical idiomas, or you have this book, which is a very famous book, English file. Everybody has that with English file. So it's basically saying it's a phonemic chart, but they added pictures to try and identify, or to try and memorize better the sounds. So for example, the sound air is the one you use in chair, for example. The sound is the one you have in nose. So they use these pictures to try and help you memorize what you're pronouncing. Okay, however, nowadays, there used to be pronouncing dictionaries, paper dictionaries, that were just for pronunciation, phonetic dictionaries. Okay, nowadays, we have lots of things online, of course. So my own personal recommendations, and you can use this on your computers, on your mobile phones, your devices, whatever. Number one, the Cambridge Dictionary. There are millions of dictionaries, but if you want to hear how a word sounds, I would go to the Cambridge Dictionary probably. It's free, you just go to their website and there you are, okay? Why the Cambridge Dictionary? Because the phonemic transcript is going to be the standard one, the International Phonetics Association we're going to use. And also, in general, you get lots of examples of use in context. So that's the one I always go first. It's my own personal choice. There's a great option if you need to know how to pronounce something, especially place names. Because if you have words that are in a dictionary, go to a dictionary and that's it. But if you want to pronounce, for example, can anybody tell me the name of the man who won the Vuelta Ciclista España? This biker, Chris... No. I have to say Forvo stands out because, as I say, it's real people recording it. It's not a computer pronouncing it, it's actual people. So that's the reason why it stands out from the rest. Okay? Yeah, you spell something like that, yeah? How would you pronounce it? Yeah, it's Chris Froome, yeah? For example, how would you... Oh, this is easy for you. Yeah, you're going to get this one right. Ed Sheeran, for example, yeah. But you have this actress, Reese, with something. There's Elsa Pataki's husband. Liam, yeah. So when you have all these names that you really don't know how to pronounce, the interface is something like that. So you just go, there's a search box, you type the term you need, and there it is. Okay? Something called synthetic phonics. and my colleague Sarah is giving the course right next door. Synthetic phonics, for those of you in secondary, probably is the way in which very young children are taught to read and write in the UK, in America, and then lots of bilingual schools here in Spain are using this system as well. It's how to learn to read and write for native speakers and then for people in bilingual schools, in almost native speaking contexts, okay? So if you're used to synthetic phonics, if you use Jolly Phonics or any other phonic systems, you have some symbols and some structures. However, the symbols we're going to use are a bit different. We're talking about the same sounds, but the way of representing things may be a bit different. Okay, so I apologize because it's the way it is. And in fact, when I've attended, because my mind was trained with the phonemic symbols we're going to use in this course, the ones you have in the dictionary. And when I was attending phonics courses, I said, oh no, my mind just had to get used to it, so I apologize. You might find some differences, but the sounds, the way you hear words, it's exactly the same. It's just the way of writing it down, putting it down on paper, okay? If you're interested, if you finish this course and you find this topic, you know, it's just the passion of your life. There are online courses, for example, the BBC have an online course about pronunciation, about different features and different sounds. So you can go there and you have lots of things to practice. Okay, let's get started. That was all an introduction. So our first topic, what do we mean by a transparent language? What do you think we mean? We're going to try and see some of the historical reasons probably why this is not the case, okay? And instead of blaming those Brits that are crazy, okay, so let's try. Okay, probably one of the main problems why this relation is not transparent is the very geography of the island, okay? And the position, the geographical position of the island. As you know, it's an island, obviously. We have here France. We have in the north, we have, you know, Scandinavian countries, etc. So, as you know, Britain, the British Isles have been invaded many times along history. And so those invasions have had a result on the language as well. This is what we're going to... Also, we can't forget that I'm going to talk about Britain a lot. I'm sorry, I love Britain. But today, English is an official language in 61 countries. So obviously, global English, and even if in Spain or in France it's not an official language, it's one of the official languages in Europe. And so all of this is permeating the language, it's affecting the way English is spoken and pronounced and written, okay? So we're going to start with the history. As you probably know, Britain was invaded by Romans in 54, starting 54 BC, and then some time later. The Romans at first were not very successful because the Britons resisted and they threw them out, but then in the end the Romans stayed for a bit. So from that time, we still have some words remaining in the English language that come straight from Latin. For example, can you read it with me, please? This one here. Candle. That comes from Latin candela. Yeah, so it's more or less exactly the same. Candle. We have wine. It comes from Latin vinum. Okay, again, very easy. And then we have lots and lots of place names ending in something like Chester or Castor or like Leicester, Manchester, Lancaster, Worcester. Have lots and lots of place names like that come from the Latin castra. So it's the ending has, we have Chester, the city of Chester, is just a derivation from the Latin castra. So from that time we have those words, okay? Okay, here comes the problem. Between these years, a very, very long period, if you think of Roman culture, the Romans were really cultured and, you know, they were good times. But almost for 700 years, the language was mainly oral. The population was illiterate, they couldn't read or write at large. So English was a language that was mainly spoken, but not actually written. And what happens with oral languages? So oral languages, yeah, you know, the oral tradition is great, but everyone can do whatever they want. They change lots of things, and if there's nothing or very few things written down on paper, come on, you know what happens, okay? Also, what we call Old English did not derive from Latin. It was a Celtic language, and it was inflected. You know what it means if it's inflected, yeah? If you remember your Latin, for every, depending on the position or the function of the word, you had to use a different word. You had to use either the nominative, the accusative, the dative, whatever. So if I talked about a hand, depending on whether it was the subject or the object or a complement, I had to give it different endings. So this is what happened in Old English. Okay, so it was highly inflected, lots and lots of inflections in different cases. The verbs were just crazy. You had lots of tenses and it was much more complicated than it is today. However, every letter was only linked to one sound. So the grammar was terrible, but pronunciation was just great. Okay? It was really similar to what German, present-day German looks like. If you know German, it's very difficult to learn, very difficult to have right, but the pronunciation, you learn some basic things at the beginning, and that's it. So Old English was something like that. But mainly, about 1066, you know, this is the south of England. In the beautiful village of Hastings, something happened. Do you know? What happened? Come on, David. People coming from Normandy, from the north of France, invaded Britain, and they stayed for many years. Okay? So the Battle of Hastings changed the English language forever, probably. We started what they call Middle English, anyway, around the Middle Ages. Okay, imagine you live in Britain, you live on the Isle, and you're just a peasant. You're not a rich person, you work the land, etc. You're not really literate, you can't read or write, probably, okay? And you are invaded by this bunch of people, the French, who, on the other hand, are cultured, can speak Latin, have their own language as well, but they can read, write, they write songs, they write poems. Also, they have the money. They are the invaders, they are the ruling class, and they have the money, and they have the culture. So can you imagine what's going to happen to the language? If English is nowhere to be found on paper, what we find on paper, the documents we have from that time, are going to be in French. And French is going to have an effect, because it's going to be imposed somehow on the English. Okay? Also imagine, what we have on paper from that time comes from the French scribes. In monasteries, the people writing down things were the scribes, okay? And those scribes were French, not English, okay? So even if they wanted to write down in English, okay, imagine you're writing something or in a language which is not your native language. So sometimes you make mistakes. Come on, we make mistakes in the languages which are not our mother tongue. Okay, so sometimes they made mistakes because they didn't know, they couldn't speak proper English. Or sometimes, do you know how scribes wrote? What did they use to write? Did they use pens or pencils? No. Come on, go ahead.
Is maybe from up to now or not?
Yeah, they use something called a quill. You know, like a bird's feather or something, yeah, or something like that. And they had to use ink, so they had to dip the nib or whatever they had, and as we were saying, they had to write, they couldn't rest their palm. They had to write like that, with ink dropping. Okay, so let me... if you have to write, in Old English, the word love was this, okay? So you know how they wrote, you know, this very precise letter, very complicated to do. Okay, so imagine to do this, you have to lift the instrument you're using. And then maybe there will be a blot of ink. And you will have to start all over again. Come on, I'm not going to start all over again. So maybe, if I can do that, I don't have to lift the instrument I'm using, my quill or whatever. So that's the reason why we spell an O instead of a U, which could be, there will be more things. But anyway, that's the reason why it changed from an U to an O. Okay, and then well, something else happened. But this happened to lots and lots of words, just mainly because it was easier to write a different letter than the original letter. Just because, okay? From that time, we have lots of words that were French words and that remained in the English language. And as you can imagine, they have to do with things from the upper classes and the ruling classes. So we have words related to the government, well, this very word government, like count, parliament. If you speak French, they are very much the same today in French. You talk about le parlement, you talk about, whatever, les nobles, la nobilité, le gouvernement. It's basically the same, very few changes. If you talk about the military, you talk about a battle, yeah? About an alliance. Enemy. And in French, you have basically the same. You talk about la bataille, l'admiral. It's basically the same. So you're just stuck into the language, okay? We talk about... Remember this very complicated word I told you about? Comes from French. Blame it on French. Okay? Oh, this one. A marriage, yeah. In French, we would say le mariage, just a singular, but exactly that, okay? Interestingly enough, when you talk about the union of two people, if you talk about the ceremony, you use the Anglo-Saxon word. You talk about a wedding. But when you talk about the official thing, you talk about a marriage. And that's going to happen lots of times in English as well. For the same concept, you will have a pair of words. Yeah. And for the everyday word, you're going to use the Anglo-Saxon word, the English origin word, and for the official word, or the, the more official word, you're going to use the French version. Okay? Obviously, we talk about the church. You have lots of words from French. And very interesting, probably you know this. When we talk about cooking, when we talk about cuisine, yeah. When we talk about the animal, we use the Anglo-Saxon word, and we talk about a pig. But when we eat it, when we have a look at the menus, it's pork. That comes from Old French, okay? Again, the animal is a cow, but when you eat it, you eat beef. You talk about a fillet. I'm going to eat a fillet, sauté, or whatever. Very French as well, you know. And the word soup as well comes from French as well. Okay? Okay, things are going to be a bit different when we leave the bloody Middle Ages and we turn a new leaf into modern English, which basically, today we are, ending modern English or whatever. Around this time, there was the printing press, there was the invention of a printing press, so obviously literacy could improve. People, started to be able to read and write at a larger scale. And London was the site of, the printing press. We had, have you heard about the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer? Anyway, one of these very important works of literature in English was printed at the time, so yeah. The standard of a language was starting to improve, and there was a change in the language. Okay, this is very important. As I said, in Old English, you read what you wrote. If you had an U, you read an U. You had an A, you read an A. Oh, but there was this, what they call the great vowel shift, the great vowel change that happened along different centuries. Let me show you what happened. If you had a word like this, at the beginning, you would read what you wrote. Rise. Oh, perfect. But then around the time, they started to change a bit, and then they would say something like raise, or rise, and then at the end of the 18th century, this is what you got, the actual, the current rise. Also because this letter, this E at the end, fell into disuse. So we never pronounce it anymore, for example. Again, the same. In the Middle English, you read mouth. In the end, because of these changes, you pronounce mouth. So it happened with lots of, especially with long vowels. So over these centuries, they changed either into other kinds of long vowels or into diphthongs, probably. Okay, we're going to get into long depths into this today, but in the second and third session, remember about this great vowel shift, okay, because we will talk about vowels. This is the vocabulary we have in English, and we would say, come on, English, so, I don't know, 80% of words will be of English origin, and then some other languages. I'm afraid not, because you have, for example, English origin, Germanic origin, which would be English and similar. You only have 26%. So English has been heavily influenced. So we have 6% Greek, you know, for words like medicine, for example, etc. Other languages have derived from proper names. Okay, Latin, 30%. Either taken when the Romans were there or later in history, because Latin, of course, gave prestige to the language. So whenever they wanted to invent something, even now, when they want to invent something, they record to either Latin or Romance languages. So 30% Latin, 30% French, 29% French, and then just 26 English. The problem is that this 26% is what people actually use. If you think of irregular verbs, you remember you had to learn your irregular verbs all those years ago, yeah. These words were at the very root of the language. They are probably the oldest words in the language. And that's why, because they come from the Old English, you have these strange past tenses. However, when you have these new versions, these new verbs that may come from other languages or are new to the language, then you have the new version, the regular form. Okay. Also, I have to tell you, when you are getting up in the ladder of English, if you're talking at B2, C1, C2 levels, you're going to be using words from Latin and French origin. So it gets easier for Spanish people, because these words are much more academic, much more formal words. Okay? So it'll be easier for a Spanish person to actually write a PhD or thesis or to give a course in English than maybe have conversation at the pub. Okay, because they're going to use all these words. If you're really passionate about this, you can go to these two links. You have more maps that explain the history of English, if you're interested in it. Or you have this 4 or 5 minute video. It's a TED video, not a TED talk, it's just a video made for TED that explains where did English come from. It's in English with subtitles in English, so you can watch it or share it or show it to anyone you like. And again, you have some links here explaining why English is so difficult to pronounce, more of the same. And yeah, the BBC, you know, apologizing for having such a difficult language, probably. So as I said, we're going to have a quick look at different geographical varieties. In British English, we have varieties like northern accents or accents from the Midlands, the middle part of the UK. Or we're going to explore the very quaint, very peculiar Scottish rhotic accent. We're going to be fortunate enough that from tomorrow we have Alison, a Scottish girl, a Scottish Erasmus student working here with us. So I'll bring Alison along. And she has a very Scottish accent, really Scottish accent. She's lovely. So you're going to experience firsthand what we mean by rhotic accent. I'll explain in a minute. In American English, of course, America is huge, so you have millions of different accents. But very typical are the accent from New York, like Robert De Niro, for example, has a New Yorker accent, or the Southern drawl that I will show you. You have Australian English, Canadian English, lots of different geographical varieties, of course. If we think of social varieties, something is associated with social class rather, we will see some examples of a London Cockney, which is kind of social variety. Or for example, if you think of America, you have the black vernacular, the kind of way that black people may speak. Okay? You know, of course, that the English they speak in the UK and the English they speak in America may be totally different. Lots of things are the same, of course. If you want to read a bit about it, you have some differences in vocabulary, in pronunciation, etc. You go to this link and you have some of them here. And it's called, very interestingly enough, Perfect Strangers. That's the name for the website. Okay. If you want to actually experience the original Scottish accent, you may watch any film starring Sean Connery. It was so funny when Sean Connery was playing 007, the English secret agent. He used his Scottish accent and he didn't bother to change it or anything. No, he's always kept his original Scottish accent. If you watch a film, for example, called Under the Skin, it's a fairly recent film starring Scarlett Johansson, but it's set in Glasgow. So Glaswegian is just probably one of the worst or the most complicated accents to understand. So, okay, Scarlett Johansson, you can understand her, she speaks general American, fair enough. But all the other people around her, I needed the subtitles, I have to confess. Otherwise, I would have missed most of the film, okay? And if we find the time, I will show you this video, and if not, you can watch it at home. Do you know in Aragon we have Oregon Televisión, which is, it's a comedy show just based on Aragonese cliches, etc. So in Scotland they have something called Bernistown, which again plays on Scottish stereotypes and makes fun of them. And there's a hilarious sketch about these two Scotsmen on a lift, which is voice activated. And they're going to use their Scottish accents. So what happens on the lift? If we have time, I'll show it later to you. The Scottish accent is called rhotic. And when we say rhotic, it means that they have kept the R sound. Exactly. Instead of pronouncing, as in standard English, cat, they tend to say coot or cot, definitely closing the mouth when they pronounce it. Okay. How would you pronounce this? Word. Something like that. Yeah. What we do in standard English, what happened was that at some moment in the 18th century, this sound disappeared or almost disappeared in pronunciation. And this had an effect on the vowel before. So instead of pronouncing it like an O sound, we pronounce it with this sound, like earth, bird, word, work. But we pronounce that sound because this R disappeared in pronunciation. Okay? However, Scottish accents could keep the pronunciation of the R. And that's why probably the vowel sounds different. So you have two differences. You have both the R being pronounced and the vowel being different. So we would ask Alison. But anyway, they would say something like word, and you can hear the R, and you can hear a slightly different vowel sound. Okay? So this is what we mean by rhotic accent, that the R that would probably be silent in lots of standard British accents is present still. Okay? That's what happens in Scottish accents. If we go a bit down, in the northern varieties of England probably, If you've watched a film like The Full Monty, if you watch it in English, again, you could hear things like the ones we were discussing before. When you have words like sum up, this sound, instead of a or something like that, would be closed and would be something like maybe sum up, something like that, yeah? Also, when you use the words that contain this sound, like class, yeah, or you talk about a car or something like that, this very posh vowel R, probably northern varieties would use one vowel which is closer to the one used in cat. Okay, also like American English, probably. Sometimes in British English you would probably say dance, whereas in American you would say dance. So something like that happens as well in the northern accents of the UK. Okay, and I just love it. Okay, do you know anything about Cockney?
It's the lower classes accent.
Yeah, it originated around the 19th century, and it was the typical language that the working classes of London, which is geographically as well, the lower classes in London, the working classes used, okay, and it's still used today with some varieties, but it's still more or less in use today. Have you watched the film called My Fair Lady? Can anybody explain basically what it is about?
I watched them in London in the theatre. It was about a woman, a social class woman, and but she wants. I don't know if she's going to work as a. I don't remember. But he wants, or she wants to pronounce better because she speaks very, very bad.
Another example of Cockney, for example, if you know about a TV show called The Midwife, these were novels written by someone who was a midwife, the nurse that brings babies into the world. So this woman worked. If you think of London, she worked in the East End of London, the poorest part of London, in the 1950s. So she wrote her memoirs, and she wrote about lots of the social things going on at the time, and lots of the people living there in the East End. This is where Cockney originated. So she wrote about her experiences, and the TV show, it's a BBC TV show, showed lots of Cockney, because it's what they had at the time. And if you want to listen to Amy Winehouse, there's an interview, a very short interview, just for you to listen to her and to notice her lickle and her thing and these things she said. One of the reasons why Cockney sounds so different is because the diphthong A is pronounced like I, or something like that, like the Rhine in Spain, is the rain in Spain. There's a song by Amy Winehouse that talks about a little carpet burn, but she doesn't say little. She says something like lickle. Okay, so some consonant sounds are changed as well. For example, when you have words containing these, like a thing or think, they say think, thing. So they change the with an F, for example. Sometimes these H sounds are dropped. So they would talk about a house, an house, instead of a house, for example. That's another feature of Cockney. And you have something which I can't pronounce, I'm sorry, something called glottal stops. I can only pronounce it in 2 or 3 examples, I'm so sorry. You can say that this is British, or you can say this is British. Okay, so this T in the middle of words is not actually pronounced. What they do is they stop their throats. British. So the British people is something like that. It's called glottal stops. I love it. I can't do it. I'm so sorry. But anyway, Amy Winehouse spoke a sort of Cockney, more or less, a contemporary variety of Cockney. She had lots of these things. David Beckham as well, the football player. And some years ago, they were nominated for the most hated accents in the UK. So yeah, it's not really prestigious to speak Cockney. So just enough for you to know that it exists, to recognize it if you want, but please don't try and imitate them. Okay. Okay, there's a sort of contemporary version of Cockney. It's called estuary English because it's around the Thames area, and singer Adele speaks with that kind of English. If you know Adele, when she's on stage, how does she dress?
Big dresses.
Yeah, but she's very smart. She always dresses in black, you know, perfect makeup, perfect hair, and she looks so sophisticated, and her songs, you know, are sophisticated as well. But if you hear her speak, it's totally the opposite. Not a very sophisticated lady, at least from... Would you like to close the windows? If you're interested in the relationship between the way singers use language in their songs, you can have a look at this article. For example, if you think of the Beatles sang, especially the first songs, sang with an American accent. Maybe because they wanted to imitate rock and roll singers, their idols, which were American, maybe. But anyway, some of the British singers lose their accents when they're singing. Okay, so if you want to read a bit about it. And if you were thrilled about varieties of English and you want to read a bit more, there's this beautiful blog that gives you different information about different dialects. So you can listen to some things, you can read a bit more about this. Okay, in this course, we're going to concentrate on something called received pronunciation. And this is the kind of English that people like, who are they? Kate Middleton and Prince William. So the kind of, you know, the royals probably would speak this kind of language, politicians, and the language typically spoken at the BBC, which is a sort of standard model of pronunciation. Okay, this RP pronunciation is associated somehow to prestige, to education, to, you know, public schools, expensive education, Oxford, Cambridge. Okay, so this is what we're going to practice, especially here. We're going to mention different varieties, but we're going to concentrate on, let's say, the standard pronunciation of British English. That would be it. Okay. And in order to practice received pronunciation, my suggestion is to have a look at good models of this standard pronunciation. And how can we do it? Okay, I can ask Sarah to come. Sarah is going to come on the last session. You'll get rid of me. But at home, if you want, there are millions of TV shows, millions of films you can watch. And this is what I tend to do. There are shows like Downton Abbey, for example, if you know about it. There's the brilliant Sherlock, the new Sherlock version. It's just great. All the characters tend to speak with a standard RP pronunciation. You have actors like Hugh Grant, like Jeremy Irons, for example. They have this great speaking voice and also very posh accents, very cultured, educated accents. I showed you a clip from My Fair Lady before, and the film starred Audrey Hepburn. And for me, it's a terrible choice because Audrey Hepburn had one of the best, nicest, loveliest speaking voices ever, and a perfect British accent. She wasn't British, of course. She was Belgian. She was from Belgium. She was a Belgian actress, but she was raised in British schools. So she had perfect textbook accent. She was so perfect that British people said it sounded so artificial, and Americans said that she sounded so too British. Oh, she's British. So she was just perfect. And if you want to read anything more about RP as the standard of British English pronunciation, you can go to this link. Okay, when we talk about American varieties, we have talked about standard British English. There's something called General American. America is huge, as we said before, but there's a sort of standard American pronunciation, which tends to be, agreed upon. Okay, it's much more complicated to agree on these particular features of American English. But anyway, there seems to be a consensus that, again, the educated, American English spoken tends to be the general American, and from there you have some different varieties. We mentioned before some examples, the New York accent, for example, and if you think of the southern states like Texas and the southern states of the US, they have what they call the southern drawl, which means that some vowels tend to last longer. So there's like R sound, I can't do it, but you will notice in a moment. So, but it's basically that some vowel sounds tend to last longer than you would expect them to. It's basically the idea. As I say, Texas. If you ever heard the Bush family speaking, for example, if you've watched a film called Cat on a Hot Tin Roof by Tennessee Williams, it's a play, and then there's a film. You can hear examples of that. And we're going to watch a clip from a Hitchcock film, Alfred Hitchcock film called Marnie. It's a story of a woman who is sick, who is psychologically sick, and she steals. She's a compulsive thief somehow. And her mom is from the southern part of the US, and the mom speaks with the southern drawl. Okay, so we're going to watch. Okay, so as I said, we're going to concentrate basically on British RP pronunciation, but along the course, if there are different pronunciations, we will have these icons, of course, to make the difference between British or American English. Okay, because sometimes there might be different. Again, if you want more good examples of good pronunciation, you can go to any of these links. These are either films or TV shows, a list of films and TV shows that I made some time ago. I updated the shows the other day. And there you have, as I say, films or TV shows that are useful for learning English, for improving your listening comprehension, and of course, good examples of pronunciation. If you want to have a look, they're there. I'm going to ask you to try and see if your intuition about the language, about pronunciation is right. You're sitting in groups, so you may have different opinions in your group, and so you have to think, you have to pair, contrast your information, and then share with the rest of the class. That's what we're going to do, okay? Think, pair, share.
The sound, it was so strong, no?
Definitely. That's something exactly. It was like a jamón sound. Exactly, very good. Yeah.
The B sound, if I remember correctly, it said victory, not victory.
Exactly. The difference between these two sounds, he's keeping the Spanish non-distinction. Exactly. Yeah.
Spanish for great, right, important in front of.
Yeah, so the sound, the English sound tends to be somehow more rounded, something like that, and front, or no, that's Scottish, but anyway, in front of, yeah. It's in English, the R sound is darker somehow, it's at the back, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the A,
Mm-hmm.
He said was, sang, and these kind of things.
This is just terrible. I think this is, those of you who are in infants and primary, please, this is one of the first words that should be taught.
Was.
Yeah, was. Yeah, I can't think of a dialect of any variety of the ones I told you. I don't know of any that say was or something like that. So, yeah, so that's essential. Did you notice, for example, aspirations, when you have words like, I can't remember now, but anyway, whenever you have sounds like this in stressed words, there's a difference between saying pan, he ido a comprar pan, or I've got a new pan. So he had lots of these things like t. For example, he pensado en ti, or I'm going to buy some tea. There's a difference, of course, yeah, between these T, T, T. So I don't think he did any of these aspirations at all. That's probably one of the main reasons why he sounds so Spanish, among all these other things, of course. Yeah. Okay, so after this rather long introduction, and I apologize, but I really felt it was needed. Okay, so we're going to have a look at very important concepts when we talk about phonetics, and this is for you to really understand why things are the way they are. Okay, imagine what happens when we're talking about pronunciation, and we spell it like that. It's the same. It comes from the same family of words, yeah. And we say pronunciation, but then the word is pronounce. So this shows the very root of a problem, yeah? The spelling and pronunciation that is so different. We have it in the very words we're using to describe. Okay, as we said, this is essential. English is a stress-timed language. So this is a mantra you have to repeat yourselves when you go to bed tonight. English is a stress-timed language, okay? And Spanish is a syllable-timed language. I will show you an example in a minute and you understand it perfectly. In Spanish, how many vowels do we have?
5.
In Spanish we have 5 vowels, in English we have 12. And then 8 diphthongs as well. But pure vowels, you have 12 different vowels. Even if you write 5, but in pronunciation you have 12. When we talk about consonants, some consonants are voiced, or linears, doesn't matter, voiced, and some are voiceless. We say that a consonant is, or a sound is voiced when we put our hands in our throats and we can feel our throats vibrating as if it was a mobile phone. Okay? So when we say, for example, does it feel like your mobile phone vibrating? So whenever you have vibration in your vocal cords, that's what we call a voiced sound. All vowels and diphthongs are voiced, and we have some consonants which are voiced as well. Yeah. And we say that a sound is voiceless, all other consonants, when there's no vibration of the vocal cords. For example, if you use the you can feel there's something going on, but there's no vibration. It's not like your mobile phone on vibrate, yeah? That's the difference. That's all you need to know, okay? And just for you to know, this is perhaps not important, but for you to know, there's a distinction between phonemes and allophones. Phonemes are what you have in the dictionary, the symbols you have, and if you change a phoneme, the word is going to have a different meaning. If you think of bat, or you think of bet, you change just one sound, one phoneme, and there's a difference in meaning, okay? However, we talk about allophones when it's just a different pronunciation of the same phoneme. Some people pronounce it like that, some people pronounce it the other way. Okay, so that's the difference. A phoneme makes a difference in meaning. An allophone, it's just exactly the same transcription, but British people could pronounce it like that, Americans could pronounce it the other way, Australians like that, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we're going to concentrate on phonemes probably, and some of their possible realizations. Some of their possible allophones, okay? Okay, do you remember this poem from your school days? When, if you remember in school, typically, when we were learning poetry, we had to measure how many syllables poems had. And we did something, in different ways, but we said, volverán las oscuras golondrinas en tu balcón. And we counted the syllables, because that's the way we measured poetry, and we said if it was a sonnet or a pareado or whatever, you remember. So we analyzed syllables and the rhyme it had at the end. But we talked about syllables. In Spanish, when we talk about palabras agudas, esdrújulas, llanas, we talk about the number of syllables and where in the number of syllable in the number of syllables, you're going to get the stress. But we think about the number of syllables. Yeah? In English, this is not the case. Okay, in this case, I'm analyzing this poem, and I would be interested in sigh no more, lady, sigh no more. I'm interested in the stressed syllables. Why? Because all the other syllables are going to be unstressed, irrelevant somehow, and probably the pronunciation is going to be blah blah blah. That's the problem with listening comprehension exercises, that some things are very easy to understand and some others are blah blah. Blah blah. Blah blah. I'm exaggerating, but this is how the rhythm of English goes. Stressed versus unstressed. And we don't really care if it has 3, 4, 5, or 7 syllables. Okay? We talked about vowels before. As we said, in English, we thought we had 5 vowels. You wrote the vowels and you gave them those names. A, E, I, O, U. Okay, this is the way you write them. However, as we said before, in actual fact, we have 12 vowels. You have these vowels which are short and these vowels which are long. That's something we don't have in Spanish. All our vowels are exactly the same length. In English, you do have to make a distinction, and there is a difference. Okay, there's a distinction in length and also the way you pronounce them. For example, you have these 2 E sounds here, but the difference is not just whether it's short or long. This is more like E, maybe closer to an E sound. It's not exactly an E, but it's closer to an E sound. Whereas this one is longer and more E. Again, exaggerating. So there's a difference both in length and in quality, in pitch. Okay? And apart from the 12 vowels, we have 8 diphthongs as well, which are phonemes. They make a difference, and that's why they have their own specific. When you see these 2 sounds, it's not 2 vowels together. It's one sound, okay, but one phoneme, rather said. One phoneme, and they have these 2 symbols. But anyway, it's just one phoneme, okay? You know already all the traps of English. You know we have silent letters we have to spell but we never pronounce. We know that letter digraphs, 2 letters put together, they are sometimes pronounced one way but some other times pronounced in a different way. So letter digraphs can be tricky. We talked about the letter R in between vowels, that sometimes it's not pronounced or very slightly pronounced, so this is going to create confusion. We know that vowels in different contexts can be pronounced differently. I mean, the vowel grapheme can be pronounced in many different ways. Stress in words. I don't know if you've thought about this before, but we're going to talk about this in this course. Whether a syllable is stressed or unstressed is going to make a huge difference in pronunciation, okay? And then the whole idea of a stress in sentences, okay? And exactly the same word, whether it's placed in one position in the sentence or in another, it's going to be pronounced in a different way. With words as usual as for, from, of, at. They have 2 different pronunciations depending on their function in the sentence and where the stress falls. I'm going to give you a list of British place names. And in your groups, I would like you to try and discuss how you pronounce them. You will know many of them, I'm sure, okay? But just try and guess as many as you can, okay? So we have Greenwich, we have Cambridge, Leicester, Worcester, this is an U sound, Worcester, we have Grosvenor Square, have Derby, Slough, Edinburgh, Reading, Tottenham, Buckingham, Chiswick. I promise, the moment you know how to read these symbols, it's so easy to read English because you read what you pronounce, and it's just great. Place names here in these websites if you want to have fun, if you want to discover why things are. This is not exactly English, this is a Welsh place name, but it's the longest place name in Britain. If you ever dare to read it, then congratulations. And
I did there, and it's funny because there is